coming to conclusions is extremely important when studying any topic. Like, there's no point in reading and really informing yourself on something if you're not going to come to any conclusions. You know, in the past 5 years or so, I've been extensively studying racism, reading as many books as I can, following the news very closely on a daily basis, and it took just for me just 4 years ago when Ferguson broke out, I came to conclusions about a lot of things. I live in St. Louis, and I observed everything that went on. And coupled with what the stories that I found in the news daily with the books that I was reading, I came to conclusions about police. I came to conclusions about white people. I came to conclusions about a lot of things. And when you're reading books written by people like Derek Bell and Dorothy Roberts and Dr. John Henrik Clark and Dr. Amos Wilson and Dr. Mumba Ani and the writings of Mamui Abu Jamal, it's very easy to come to conclusions because what they write makes so much sense and is so intelligent. And if more black people read books written by them, then there would be a lot more clarity about the situation that we face. I mean, when Ferguson busted out, I was seeing stories like bars in St. Louis having like 5-shot Mike Brown specials. White people making jokes about Michael Brown being shot and murdered and putting it out for everybody to see. I've seen cops recording videos singing songs about Michael Brown's murder. Seeing Darren Wilson receiving $1 million in donations from white people. Reading the comments of the white people that donated the money to him. It made it very easy for me to come to conclusions about white people and police. And recently, yesterday, I saw an article about police claiming blue racism. The games that these people play. I mean, it made law enforcement, as run by Europeans, is a completely evil institution that serves no function other than to maintain white supremacy, to maintain control over the non-white population, keep them in line, and generating revenue for the state. Those are their primary concerns. The warrants, tickets, fines, and arrests, the police, that's all they do. They're trying to keep the non-white population in line through intimidation tactics and occasionally murder, because law enforcement always attracts the most violent people you could possibly imagine. Cops always have in their background some sort of violent history, domestic violence, always. But of course, that never comes out when cops murder somebody. Their background is never even spoken of, just the black person that they murdered. Every time a cop is on video brutalizing or shooting a black person, you never ever see cops criticizing other cops. Every blue moon, like every 100 incidents, you might see some social media post by one cop who might condemn the act, but it is so infrequent that it's pretty much meaningless. And the cases like Daniel Holtzclaw, like that told me so much about some cop in Oklahoma, serial rapist cop preying on exclusively black females, raped over a dozen women. They also, they didn't cover him. Not only did the mainstream media not cover it, they also, the people who did cover it, they never even tried to even suggest that what he did was something that a lot of other cops probably did and still do. That in a country that has such incredible poverty, the idea of some cop going to some poor environment and preying on all the women there, there's a lot of areas in this country for cops to do that, and Daniel Holtzclaw isn't the only one. But you will never see any sort of investigation into that or even suggest that. It's like pedophiles, Hollywood executives. Some white child actor comes out and talks about how child actors are sexually abused in Hollywood, but you don't see anybody doing any investigations into it because Hollywood executives are white. White people run Hollywood, and you're not going to see no big investigation into rich white people in Hollywood. I didn't even know that law enforcement operates on quotas. The cops often will pull people over just because they have quotas that they have to keep, or ticket people just because they have quotas that they have to keep, arrest quotas. And if people operating under quotas, obviously justice does not factor into their job. And, no matter how many, these police unions that go around talking about what victims the police are and try to pass these Blue Lives Matter bills as if cops need any more protection. These are some profoundly evil people. There's no ambiguity in this whatsoever. You're dealing with some monsters. People in those people who put those uniforms on have signed a deal to be monsters. They are not. They have agreed. I'm not going to be a human being anymore. I will defend this evil institution to my dying day. That's basically what they have agreed to do. And they put even non-white people who put on that uniform, no matter how misguided they might be, you agree to put on that uniform. You've agreed to serve, monsters. You've agreed to work for evil, and that police uniform represents the same thing as the Klan's robe. It's the same thing. When I see a black person wearing a policeman's uniform, all I see is a black person in a Klansman robe. It represents the uniform represents the same thing, because the history of law enforcement in this country, especially, is slave catching and night riders, and law enforcement in this country has never existed to bring justice or anything, just to maintain the control of the non-white population and protect the economy with catching slaves or doing whatever. It's never had anything to do with justice. And yet every time some cop gets shot, people always act like the media acts like any person who puts on that police uniform is immediately a hero for doing so, as if there's some high standard regarding cops. And anybody can be a cop. All you need is a propensity for violence, and you can be a cop. Just putting on that uniform does not mean that I have to respect you. It makes no sense whatsoever. I served in the U.S. Air Force from 2004 to 2008 during a time of war. And yet I'm supposed to respect some jerk who just rolled out of bed and passed some easy test to put on some cop uniform so he could harass black people, and I'm supposed to respect him just for putting that uniform on? Give me a break. The media always talks about cops like they're soldiers, like their job is extremely dangerous. No, it's not. It's not. There are much more dangerous jobs. It's more dangerous to be a truck driver than it is to be a cop. Yet they always, oh my God, every time a cop kills somebody, they're always in the right. And they're always in the right. When they kill somebody, then something is wrong. But it's not possible for a cop possibly to have been in the wrong, murdering somebody, then something is wrong. And every time a cop gets killed, it's always an assassination. It's always an ambush. Those are the words they always use. And they always use the same language when a cop gets killed. And the person that killed the cop is always apprehended within a few hours. The justice moves very quickly when a cop is killed. The narrative is formed and shaped very quickly. But when a cop kills somebody, even though it's on camera and we all saw what happened, we all need to, don't rush to judgment, And like I said, cops exist to maintain white supremacy. I came to conclusions about white people, at the same time I came to conclusions about cops. And, at that time I was studying the works and the writings of Dr. Frances Quest Welsing, and listening to a lot of interviews from her and Neely Fuller Jr. And they spoke about racism in a way that is so different from all the other people that I ever heard speak. It was so blunt, but intelligent and logical. It made sense. And listening to their logic, coupled with the stories that I was seeing in the news, it made what white people's purpose in this world very clear. Dr. Welsing was all about black mental health, and because of her, I'm always observing the behavior of other black people and seeing the effects that white supremacy have on the mental health of other black people. And from Neely Fuller, the main thing I learned from him was the importance of words, definitions and words, and understanding, observing how racists use words and how and racists have a whole other dictionary when it comes to word usage, and they always use the same words over and over again, and the words that often, words like fair means white, but in the white supremacists always use the word fair as if fair also it means just in some sort of way. And the frequency in which I hear the word fair used or unfair used when people are talking about things, and yet most people just use words without even thinking about it. Now, every time I hear somebody speak, I'm always paying attention to the word usage, which lets me know what they're thinking or not. White people, from Dr. Welsing's theory about genetic annihilation and about white people being albino mutants, that's the idea that made it easiest for me to come to a conclusion about white people, because that makes so much sense to me. I never knew why white people were white, why black people were black. I never knew why my skin looked the way it did. But once I realized where they came from, what they are, that they're the minority on the planet, why they look the way they do, why they behave the way they do, it made it all too clear to me that they're mutants, they're freaks, they're abnormal, and they are against nature. And melanated people, black people, non-white people, are products of nature, the natural order of things. And mutants, freaks, obviously hate nature, and they're against all their racism is a war against nature. And because racism is whites against anyone who is non-white, and racism, when I say the problem is white people, it's not America. You always hear people, especially in this country, talking about talking as if America's the problem, America's this, or America's racist. No, white people are racist. When white people are the same everywhere, all over the world. It doesn't matter where they are, if they're in England, if they're in France, if they're in Australia, if they're in Germany. It doesn't matter where the white people are, they all act the same way, and they all treat the non-white population in that country the same way. It's not an American thing. America as a country might have a legacy or a history that is not exactly the same as every other country, but the people, the genetic disposition of the white population is exactly the same, and their agenda is the same. White people have to maintain control in order to survive. They can, because they're mutants, they can't survive in the natural world. They can't survive functioning within the natural order of things. They're the minority on the planet. They always have been the minority on the planet. Even though white people control everything, their numbers are still diminishing. Imagine if white people didn't have power. If they didn't have power, they would have disappeared a long time ago. If white people had never left Europe, they would be gone. Racialized terrorism is the only way that they can survive. War against everyone, everything on this planet that doesn't fit within their psychotic mindset, that's the only way that they can survive. And wherever they go on this planet, they always have to take everything away from the non-white population, store it away, even though they don't need it all, just lock it away and keep other people from being able to access it, and then isolate themselves and force all of the non-white people to live on some desolate, ravaged, unlivable piece of land, while they, and white people always have to live, in large numbers around each other. White people don't like living around non-white people because it's important that white people always live in the fantasy that they're the majority. They know they're the minority, but they always have to live in an area where all the people are white, so they can convince themselves that they're the majority. They don't like being around non-white people and being reminded that they're freaks. They always have to look around and be around nothing but white people, and that's how you can understand why they behave the way they do. When you understand that they're mutants, that they're freaks, that they're against nature, which is why white people kill animals and pose for pictures next to the corpse like that. That is the behavior of somebody who sees themselves different from nature. They see themselves separate from nature because they're freaks, because they're mutants. Someone who's a part of the natural order, doesn't do that. They see themselves as the same. They see themselves in harmony with everything else. White people are not. White people see themselves as separate from everything else, all other life forms on this planet, because they're mutants. And don't fall for any of that nonsense about, well, racism it goes both ways. No, racism is a one-way street because power is a one-way street, and racism is all about power. When people talk about racism going both ways, they're like saying that it's possible for slaves to be racist towards the slave master. Like, that's just ridiculous. Power goes one direction. Racism is always a one-way street. There's nowhere on this planet where dark people are living it up and the white people are living in the ghettos, filling up the jails. Nowhere on this planet are people treated better for being black than being white. Everyone on this planet, if you're white, you're going to be treated better. Because that's the global system that we live in, that white people have constructed. Due to recent acts in the media, white terrorism has been a topic. And again, like Dylan Roof's terrorist attack last year. This year, it's always funny to me to see the reactions of white people after their culture has been exposed for all to see how they start deflecting attention to something else. Like after Ferguson, all of a sudden the Ray Rice video was released, and all of a sudden Adrian Peterson is called out for child abuse or something, and then all of a sudden Bill Cosby comes back into the news. Like, white people had the stories ready to go for when Ferguson burst out to get the attention away from Ferguson so people will stop talking about it. Same thing last year when Dylan Roof did his terrorist attack. All of a sudden the Confederate flag all of a sudden became a topic of discussion. Bill Cosby came up again during that, and within a couple of weeks nobody was even talking about Dylan Roof anymore. And in Charlottesville, all of a sudden now everybody's just talking about Confederate statues. The topic has just gotten completely off. As long as we're not talking about white people, as long as we're not talking about white culture, everything is all right. And it's just, and white terrorism, again, is always written off as ignorance and stupid. Nobody ever talks about ISIS or Al-Qaeda as being ignorant or stupid, But white supremacists, white terrorists, even when they kill people, no, they're just ignorant. They're just stupid. They're just misguided. Again, racism is a one-way street. White people, white culture, white people can never be presented as a societal problem. Anything they do has to be minimized. And all this talk about statues and monuments, because you see people vandalizing these Confederate monuments and everything, and it's hysterical to me to look at the stuff, look at the things that white people, that racists vandalize. Because remember, recently, Emmett Till, a memorial to Emmett Till was vandalized. And I think it's multiple times it's been vandalized, shot up by white supremacists. A child that was murdered, and the murderers got away with the murder. And yet, that's not enough for white people. They have to vandalize monument to him even after that. That tells you more about the white psyche than anything possibly can. It doesn't matter. Even when they murder somebody and get away with the murder, they still, that's not, even when you're dead, that's still not enough for them. The people, they'll vandalize statues for people like Jackie Robinson or Jesse Owens or Rosa Parks, putting nooses around statues from people that have no history of violence, people that haven't murdered anybody, people that haven't enslaved anybody, just black people that were successful or black people that represent something positive. That annoys white people to the point to where they have to vandalize their image. And looking at that and then seeing Confederate monuments being vandalized, there's a big difference between spray painting a monument to a slave trader or mass murderer like Chris Columbus than vandalizing Emmett Till's memorial. A black person doesn't have to. A black person that hasn't hurt anybody gets treated far worse than a white terrorist, that has a statue, devoted to him. That tells you so much about the difference between, the white supremacist mind and the people, the people who are vandalizing these Confederate statues. I don't even know. They might be, some of them might be black people, some of them might be white people pretending to be against racism, but you don't see black people out vandalizing statues of white people that haven't hurt anybody. You don't see black people out vandalizing statues of white entertainers that don't have any history of violence or anything. No, that's stuff that white people do. White people vandalize a statue of any black person. And it's so funny looking at these white supremacist publications like Breitbart News and American Spectator and American Thinker and Front Page Magazine, looking at the articles that they post, the way they're all trying kind of scrambling for news, scrambling for stories that they can report to try to present the narrative that they want to promote. They can't. It's so hard for them to find something when their culture has been exposed to the whole world. To find something, and I even saw an article yesterday about them talking about, oh, if they're gonna talk about removing all these Confederate monuments, why don't they remove, that Malcolm X monument? The Malcolm X have a statue somewhere. Why don't take him down? He preached anti-white hatred. Why don't you again? This is the logic of white supremacists. Again, Malcolm X didn't kill anybody, didn't enslave anybody, and yet he's being compared to monuments of slave traders and mass murdering psychopaths. Again, white supremacists like to compare things and people that are not comparable, always. And of course, they always manage to get Barack Obama's name in there and try to suggest that Charlottesville, the whole incident, was possibly, Obama was possibly behind the whole thing, which is, again, atypical of white supremacists. And like they always do, whenever a black person says something that supports the narrative they like to promote, they always make sure to put that black person on the front page. Just like a couple of years ago when Spike Lee, when Chirac came out and Spike Lee was talking all about black on black violence in Chicago, and then you even saw white supremacist publications like Breitbart News printing the words of Spike Lee like he's some sort of authority on race, and all of a sudden they're talking like he speaks the truth when Spike Lee is usually a figure that they're always attacking. Then all of a sudden when he says something that they like, then all of a sudden he's a reliable source all of a sudden. They do this routinely. Whenever a black person says something that white supremacists like that fits in the narrative they like to promote, they always put them on the front page. And of course, Charles Barkley is another one of those guys. He's always on the front page because he always says what white people want to hear. But of course, that's why Charles Barkley is on television, because he says what white people want to hear all the time, and he exists solely to get black people to just not be thinking about white people and just get angry at another black person, because it's so easy to get that, to get black people not focused on white people who are the problem, and just every time a black person says something that black people don't like, it's easy to get redirected away from the white people and just focus on just that black person and all that coon Uncle Tom talk that just goes nowhere. And I never get caught up in that. Again, being from Dr. Welsing, the time that I listened to her, she never called any other black person any names. She never used profanity. She was always calm in the way she spoke. And I never resort to anti-black ranting and stuff, because that gets us nowhere. The problem is white people. And I don't care. Well, no matter, there are plenty of black people who say things that I don't like and I'm not fans of, but I'm not going to get into ranting and cursing and calling them names like I see a lot of other black people doing, because it is totally non-constructive. And those black people that are saying those things are not in control. All those black people have white people behind them telling them what to do. Charles Barkley doesn't do anything on his own. It's like all those other black people who over the years have said idiotic things, that Raven Simone and Stacey Dash, and people always get criticized, like Don Lemon and all the black people on television, Steve Harvey, any black person on television, Whoopi Goldberg that says stupid things frequently. Those black people, none of them operate on their own. They all have white people behind them. The only reason that you're hearing their voices, the only reason they have a forum to speak is because of white people. Even people like that sheriff, that David Clark or Jesse Lee Peterson, these comical figures that sound like white supremacists, except they're black men. You wouldn't even know who they were if it wasn't for the white supremacists behind them enabling them. They aren't doing anything on their own. And you always have to be conscious of that before you speak regarding any black person that speaks. It's like these people are not doing anything on their own. Black people who actually speak the truth and come from an educated perspective and actually have a pro-black perspective, and those black people operating on their own, because most of the time those black people you don't hear from them. You definitely don't see them on television. I mean, I never saw Dr. Frances Cress Welsing on television. Every time some subject regarding racism came up, I never saw her on television. The media wouldn't run to her asking what she thought. The media asked Charles Barkley what he thought. They weren't running to Dr. Tommy Curry or Dr. Marumba Ani asking her what she thought about this topic. No. On television, intelligent black people are not allowed. People like Glenn Beck and Bill O'Reilly become millionaires with their white supremacists ranting on television. There's no black people on television, intelligent black people on television, that are getting rich telling the truth, because the truth is not profitable. The only thing that's profitable in the system of white supremacy is promoting white supremacy. That's why you see it so much. And of course, the racists now, racists all operate from the same playbook. Just like when I said with cops, anytime I see an article regarding cops, even suggesting that there might be some cops that aren't good, they always use the term bad apples in reference to, there might be a few bad apples, but most cops are good. Again, always the same terms. That term is always used over and over again. Every time some white terrorist kill somebody, the response is always they're always a lone wolf. They're always a lone wolf. They're always on Dylan Roof, killed a bunch of people. Oh no, he was all by himself. There's never even suggest that he might have had any sort of assistance. His family was left alone. Nobody around him was even suggested might have been involved in what his plan. White people did everything they could to separate him from every other white person on the planet Earth. And yet, if a black person picks up a gun and kills some cops in Dallas, then all of a sudden the media is immediately trying to link them to Black Lives Matter. That black people never operate on their own. They always operate in groups. There are no lone wolves if a black person does. At least that's the media's narrative, pretty much. Anytime a cop is shot, it always has something to do with Black Lives Matter. Another routine reaction to white people that when their culture is exposed, immediately to get into a defensive sort of mode, because white people are very, image conscious, and they don't mind practicing racism, but they don't want to look like racists themselves. So they'll always those people, just like in Boston, when those racist fans, baseball fans in Boston were chanting racist slurs to the black baseball player, and the immediate responses I kept seeing was, those fans were not Boston residents. They weren't Boston fans. They were outsiders. Anything to get we're not racist. It's always those other guys. They don't mind practicing racism. They just don't like being called racist. White people are very image conscious, and they don't like, being thought of. They don't want their victims to see them for what they are. Yeah. And, it's and again, because white people live in, the logic of a mutant is a backwards logic. And I constantly see media articles that present such insane notions as, like, I even saw an article suggesting that white supremacy was bad for white people, or that white people can be victims of white supremacy, when again white people as a race would be extinct without white supremacy. So to suggest that it's bad for them is completely insane. I don't care if one or two white people were killed. Ultimately, white supremacy, they couldn't survive without it. So to suggest that it is bad for them is just absolutely ridiculous. And again, this is the logic that white people want their victims to embrace. And once you get into embracing their twisted logic, it's all over for you. It is hard to dig yourself out of that hole, because white people control institutions, and institutions control thought, as Dr. Bobby Wright once said. Institutions control thought, so they're the ones who are controlling what you think. They're controlling the TV networks, the educational institutions, they are the ones controlling how you think every day, whether you realize it or not. And it is very hard to dig yourself out of that hole once you've been brain trashed by white supremacy. I mean, I'm one of those people, and I'm still digging myself out of the hole. I mean, the games that white people like to play, like all that liberal conservative BS, they like to play a lot of games to get their victims going back and forth. I mean, the racists that call themselves conservatives are always, religious. They always claim to be religious, I should say, and spiritual. They're always claiming to be really patriotic. Their way of showing patriotism is always just to call other people un-American. That's how they show their patriotism. They never actually want to put on uniforms and fight for America or anything, because they're usually just cowards who they want to send other people to their deaths, but they would never put on uniform themselves. But they love America so much, And they're always the gun rights nuts. Not simply advocating gun rights, but they're the wackos who are just crazy about guns, who teach their children how to shoot guns at 5 years old, like those kind of people. The cliche racists that call themselves conservatives. And of course the racists that call themselves the liberals are the ones who are always talking about reform, and the ones always suggesting that racism is a product of white silence or white fear or ignorance, or and they don't never or they just want to promote the idea that just the conservatives are the ones that are racist. I mean, that's what conservatives and liberals do all the time. The other side is always the racist ones. And they send their victims, black people. Oh, black people over here. Oh, you go over here. Go over here. And I don't listen to any of the racists. They're all racist. They all ultimately have the same goal. They just have different means of achieving the goal. They're all just rich white people that like to play with their victims. Except the ones that call themselves liberals just like to slum with their victims. They like to go out and protest and pretend like they care and couldn't care less, really. A lot of what white people do in their daily lives in regards to dealing with non-white people is just recreation, Like a lot of white people were out in the 60s protesting and claiming to be out for justice and against racism, and then once they hit like a certain age and they were done having their fun with these black people, they went right along picking up the mantle from what the rest of their family was doing, and just went right into maintaining white supremacy like the rest of them. It was just a period for them, a fad, and they grew out of it. And with conservatives, you really see the morally duplicitous nature of the racists that call themselves conservatives is best seen in the most recent films that I've seen conservatives flip out over in American Sniper and Hacksaw Ridge. Those the last couple of films I've seen where right-wingers the racists that call themselves conservatives were flipping out over those two movies. And you see one movie, American Sniper, is about a famous killer, and Hacksaw Ridge is about a famous non-violent person. Again, as racists always like to present themselves as spiritual people, even though there's nothing spiritual about racists that call themselves conservatives. They always claim to love the military. Again, I was in the U.S. Air Force for 4 years of my life. I know what BS these people are when it comes to how much they claim to love the military. The moment you get out of that uniform, then they couldn't care less what happens to you. As long as you are willing to do their bidding and kill who they want you to kill, oh yeah, we love the military. Get some more military spending. We love you boys and everything. But they couldn't care less about veterans. I mean, America is notorious for mistreating its veterans. So, but again, this is the games that these people like to play. To praise a movie about someone who's famous for killing a bunch of people, and another movie about a guy who's religious and nonviolent and a victim, and of course, and a movie like Hacksaw Ridge, directed by Mel Gibson of all people, and a movie that presents a white Christian as a victim of like you have the scene his own army mates beating him up, and him not having a beaten up face and not telling on them, and having this persecution of white Christian at a time when racists that call themselves conservatives are devoting so much time to promoting Muslims as the greatest threat to humanity. It's not an accident. that you would put out a movie, presenting this white Christian as this savior figure at a time when when all of this anti-Muslim talk is not an accident. The timing, white people are very conscious about the timing of stuff like that is never an accident. White culture, white people are very deliberate. That things in white supremacy, nothing happens, by accident. They plan stuff out, and especially when it comes to propaganda. White people are very conscious about what they will allow on the screen and what they don't want on the screen. What serves a purpose, and so certain things that you will never see on the screen in a movie or anything that is factual. Like, you see lots of movies based on true stories. There's certain things that have occurred in history that you would never see. Like, you would never see a scene in a movie with white people sorting out body parts that they're going to take home from a lynching. You would never see that in a movie because that exposes white culture too much. That shows white people, in their true nature. I mean, like Birth of a Nation, Nate Parker's movie came the closest to showing white people's true nature in terms of the savagery that was shown after Nate Parker's Nat Turner's insurrection. They're showing all these white people and setting people on fire and all of this savagery, and even what they did to Nat Turner when he turned himself in, and the savagery in the eyes of the white people, the barbarism. Like, usually don't, and that's probably what turned a lot of white people off about that movie and made them turn against Nate Parker. Was he portrayed white people in too accurate a way. It didn't fit the agenda as far as propaganda goes. That's why the white people like stuff like Hidden Figures or something like that, that white people aren't shown as malevolent. All a black person has to do is get angry and start yelling, and white people will change their ways. White people aren't violent. They're shown in something like Get Out, where the white people are the bad guys in that story, but the white people in that movie might as well be aliens, and they're not violent. The only violence in the movie is from the black character killing them. And of course, in the propaganda in regards to beauty standards, how every week is another blonde white woman being presented as the new it girl in entertainment. Every week is another one. You can't even keep track of every week how it's another white woman being presented as the most beautiful woman in the world. Again, it's just a reminder to you that you're in a system of white supremacy. You're being told what the ideal is. And you probably can count on one hand, like, well-known black actresses or Asian actresses or Latino actresses on hand, and you probably can't even count on hand how many of them are actually portrayed as attractive. Because in movies and television, you almost never see a black female portrayed as sexually attractive in a way that's not cheap. You see being objectified in a very cheap, sleazy way in rap videos and stuff like that, but you never see in movies or television a black female being presented as all the men finding her desirable, as beautiful, unless she's extremely light-skinned. Lupita Nyong'o, beautiful woman, but you never see any movies with her being presented as an object of male desire. She plays some alien in Star Wars or something where you can't even see her face. White people want to make sure to keep in your mind the image of her as a slave being whipped and raped, because that's the most famous thing she's known for, and she's hardly been in anything since. You hardly seen her face, and they want you to just associate her with that. And the word propaganda is used a lot, but propaganda is only possible from people who control institutions. Propaganda is not simply presenting a narrative. Propaganda is repetition of that narrative. Seeing it over and over and over and over again. Hollywood has been around for over 100 years, and they present the same narrative over and over and over again to the point where people can't even think any other way. They see white people as heroes, and they see dark people as villains, because that's what Hollywood always presents. And you see it so much to the point where you can't think any other way. That's what propaganda does. The Nazis learned propaganda from America. Birth of a Nation, one of the most successful propaganda films ever made. Black people, we really need to stop thinking that we can educate white people out of their natural state. We devote way too much time. I remember seeing interviews and lectures from people like James Baldwin or even Malcolm X in the 60s speaking to like a room full of white people. And I'll think to myself, like, why are you talking to them? Like this post right now, what I'm saying is for black people's ears only. I have no interest in talking to any white people about racism. They're going to do what they do. What I say is for black people's ears only. I'm trying to communicate to my people. We need to stop thinking we can educate white people regarding racism. Black people are the ones who've been denied information for so long. We're the ones who had our history taken away from us and don't even know who we are. And yet we think we can educate somebody else on something that they don't have any interest in being educated on. Like, white people don't have any interest in destroying the system that is necessary for their survival as a race. It's ridiculous. We need to be educating each other. We need to be introducing each other to black authors and black journalists that study racism and get at the truth. We need to be learning about our own people. We need to be learning about Ida B. Wells. We need to be learning about Marcus Garvey. We need to be learning about David Walker. We need to be learning about all the black people who've spent their lives fighting against racism. All black people should know who Dr. Frances Quest Welsing is. Should read her books, and we know that she didn't die for nothing. The woman spent most of her life trying to educate black people about racism. And she wasn't getting rich doing it, because no black people get rich fighting against racism. The least you can do is listen to what she's said, read the books that she's written. She didn't preach hatred. She preached black intelligence. That's what I'm for. I'm for black intelligence. Black people being logical, observing what has occurred, and coming to intelligent conclusions. When you see that people are doing something and it has no effect, then you should try something else. Protests accomplish nothing. We don't need to be protesting anymore. That got us nowhere. It got us nowhere in the 60s. Is getting us nowhere now. It just gives white people, racists that call themselves liberals, an opportunity to go out slumming with the black people, pretending like they care. And it's important in the system of racism that white people convince us that they care. Because the day when black people are convinced that white people collectively don't care, that will be the end of racism. It's important that we have a little hope in us that there are some white people out there that aren't racist. That is essential to the maintenance of white supremacy. And we really need to get that out of our heads. And then just, because, again, to be a white person who's against racism is a white person who's against the survival of their own race. And I don't believe that there are any white people like that. Like I said, read as many books as you possibly can about white supremacy. You can find them very cheaply all over the place. It's easy to find the books written by the likes of Dorothy Roberts or Derek Bell, or there are plenty of books. I'm saying that there are plenty of books even written by white people that really get at what white supremacy is all about. In books like At Hands of Persons Unknown by Philip Dray, or Buried in the Bitter Waters by Elliot Jaspin, or Slavery by Another Name by Douglas Blackman, or Red Summer by Cameron McWhirter. These books, it's very hard for me to imagine that a black person could read any of those books and still be confused about racism. And these are written by white people. And again, making it very clear again, white people are not ignorant about racism. You can find tons of books written by white people about racism, letting you know that white people, they know way more than we ever could about racism, because they're the ones behind it all. But of course, I would suggest you don't buy any of these books. If you can find them at a library, you should never purchase books written by white people about racism. No, should never do that. Buy books written by black people. It took a while for me to really have the breakthrough on this topic. I mean, reading The Interracial Con Game was the book that really caused me to have the breakthrough regarding understanding racism, regarding seeing things differently. I mean, it was around the time I read that book that George Zimmerman was acquitted, and I still, I mean, at that time, that was before Mike Brown, all stuff. That summer, the Mike Brown's murder and Eric Garner's murder and everything, like, that was a watershed moment for me. Like, that was it. Like, I was never going to be confused about racism again after those incidents. And Tamir Rice and John Crawford and again, all the cases ended exactly the same, with white people laughing it up as another white killers got away with murder. Darren Wilson, Daniel Pantaleo. I mean, just monsters walking free right now. When in so many cases they're on camera murdering black people and no consequence whatsoever. That's why there's nothing to debate when it comes to police, and there's nothing to debate when it comes to white people and racism. They need it to survive. The police are an institution that they use to ensure their survival. Once you stop debating with people and you see these things that are so clear, then black people can really move forward when dealing with this subject. Because once we get it into our mind that we don't need white people and that our future is not tied to white people, then we can really accomplish something. Black people, the really confused victims of racism that think that our future as a people is tied to white people, that we need them. Those are the people that the sickest of all black people, the ones that have us, it's so difficult for them to see the truth. It doesn't matter how many dash cam videos they see of black people getting shot and or brutalized. Like, it doesn't matter. It's so hard. Those are the black people who have intimate connections with white people, see white people as their friends. In some cases, go to bed with white people, married to white people, have white people in their family who cannot make that breakthrough and see the truth. I'm fortunate in that I don't have any white people in my family. I have no emotional connection to any white person. Therefore, I can see the truth. It's harder for black people whose families have been soiled by a white presence to see the truth. And I feel for those people. I feel sorry for them. But, you save who you can. And that's why I say my words are from my people and my people alone. If there are any white people that are listening, well, I hope there aren't. And if there are, I don't care what you think. All I care about what my people think. I wish I could block out white people from listening to this post, actually. I say I'm for black people going our own way, separate from white people. Not want to have anything to do with white people. When black people are comfortable with each other and don't want to be around white people, that is when white supremacy will come to an end. When we don't even want to be around them and we don't see ourselves tied to them anymore. That's what we should be aiming for. That's all I have to say about the state of white supremacy. Thank you.